Jackson Lund, Wealth Mentor.
My name is Sam Panetta.
And here we are for another episode of Enjoy the Journey podcast. We're here with a very special guest today, Darren Zhou from Magico Constructions. Mate, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on board, mate.
So what's the story, mate? Who is Darren and what is Magico Constructions?
Yeah, so I guess the business originally started by the old man back in 2006. We started as a building company doing a lot of renovation kind of scale projects. At the time, the reason that my father wanted to start the company was because he had seen a lot of traps and a lot of horror stories out there in the construction field, and he really wanted to, put out something that's more quality and be more responsible to the client at the end of the day. So that's how the company kind of came about. And over the years, we've kind of worked through different scale projects, from high-rise, 400 units with another developer company kind of scale, to new builds, knockdown rebuilds. So yeah, it's quite a variety of range.
Beautiful. We love property, don't we, Sam?
We do love a bit of property here at Aureus. We get a bit excited about it. Mate, tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so for me, I started construction, ever since I was 16, working on the job site, doing a bit of labouring work, as you do, a bit of free manual labour.
That puts you straight.
I love how it's free.
Pretty much,
free.
yeah. Here's a shovel, go dig the trenches. So I started from there. Then after high school, kind of went to uni, did my architecture degree in bachelor's. Then after that, I did my certificate in building and construction.
Okay.
I went to the dark side, as my friend likes to say, and went on to try to be a builder.
So what was the decision between either going down the architect route of doing the design itself and being the one that brings the design to life in terms of the construction?
Yeah, for me, it's just I love the hands-on experience, just having the flexibility of working in an office, but also going on site, getting kind of your hands, nothing more satisfying than building something from nothing rather. At the end of the day, you see this building go up from scratch. And doing the design stuff, I did love doing the concept design and the strategy kind of planning and thinking behind that. But for me, I think it was just always the flexibility of being on site. That's what really drew me to the construction side. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, you guys do heaps of stuff. You mentioned that you were doing renovations, knockdown real builds, all the way up to towers, 400 units plus.
Yeah.
Is it something that you got stuck straight into those big jobs, or did you sort of work your way up from the smaller jobs to those, massive construction sites? Yeah,
so I guess throughout the process, we slowly kind of went up through word of mouth, because a lot of the work back in the day when I was just the old man, it was just pure word of mouth. So everything, we would do one renovation extension project and then just walk down the street, just from word of mouth. We've had one owner that waited like 6 months for us to build for him, just because he had seen our work and he really wanted us to be the ones. And then along the way, we came in touch with, through our subbies, the large developers. Okay. And then they got in touch, spoke with us, and liked the way that we did things. So they needed help, and then eventually, our company kind of worked under their construction team, doing some of those large-scale projects. Yeah. And
there's a fair bit of risk involved, right? So obviously, when you're going at a big project, or even a renovation or a knockdown rebuild, you've got to be on point in terms of your estimations and managing your costs and whatnot. So what do you say is the most difficult part of running a construction business?
For us, when it comes to extension renovation projects, it's a bit of a risk because there's a lot of hidden elements at play. So you're constantly, when you're knocking down walls and taking down structural columns and things like that, sometimes there's a little bit of a jack in the box, you don't really know what's there until you rip off the ceiling. So the cost blowouts where that tends to happen is a lot of assumptions sometimes get made about structural members being hidden as within the wall. And you don't really know until you start taking things off, then you start realizing, oh wait, there's no structural column there, and that's usually when the cost blowout happens, because then you'll need underpinning on the walls, and next thing you know, 200k is going down the drain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because you always hear about these situations, right? Mum and dad want to do a reno, they budget 200 grand, and then it turns out to being a $1 million renovation. Sometimes would have been cheaper for them just to knock the whole thing down and start again. Have you seen those kind of horror stories?
We haven't come across that necessarily ourselves, but we have heard stories like that. So I think one of the important things is, before you start considering about doing a renovation extension, is you need to get an engineer to come in, do a dilapidation report, assess the structural rigidity of the existing building. Sometimes if the building is not a double brick, on the structural side of things, it's probably not necessarily worthwhile trying to build another layer on top. But sometimes owners, they kind of cling on to the old. There's a bit of memories attached to the building.
Nostalgia.
Yeah. And so sometimes they want to keep it, but
Sure.
that's usually when mistakes kind of get made if they want to go down that route. Yeah.
Okay.
So what's the proper way of going about it? So let's say mum and dad are sitting at home, they're watching this, they're going, all right, there's heaps of ways to do it wrong. What's the right way to do it and get it correct?
So what we recommend is, I guess the first early step is you want to sit down with a good architect to work down, what kind of I guess space you really need for your family. So usually the architect will map out your lifestyle and develop a kind of plan or scope or brief so that they know what you guys want to achieve and what's going to be best, most suited for the owners. Once you have that done with some kind of preliminary mock design, you can then take it to the engineer, get the engineer to come down on site, access the existing structure, see if it's actually feasible to build another layer on top. Once the engineer is involved, then they can have a more of a structural kind of side of assessing the building. And from there, sometimes it might be worthwhile, depending on the client, if they've got any builders online, to get a builder to come in to just look at the buildability side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of people around here, especially on the northern beaches. They love these granny flats, right?
Yeah.
They how tricky is it for someone? They've got a house, block of land, house at the front. How tricky is it for someone to put a granny flat at the back of the property in a way that's the properties are completely segregated? Because that's one of the biggest issues that people have. It's the privacy and the access. So is that a tricky thing that a lot of people go through? Or is it relatively straightforward?
So we don't necessarily do granny flats ourselves, but we have been approached by other companies that do granny flats to be, I guess, the builder for the projects. In terms of granny flats, normally speaking, it's not that hard to get a granny flat at the back. It's just depending on the access of how you're going to get the materials. That's usually the most difficult thing. If there's no laneway, you can imagine there's no way of carrying timber, all the way to the back of the house, unless you want to crane it back, which can be very costly. From whether you're not allowed to build a granny flat at the back, you probably need to look at your land zoning issues and speak to council to see if that's something that's allowed. But we are starting to see a shift, I think, when a lot of households starting to put granny flats back in the house because it's just good return investment, I suppose. Because to build a new granny flat is fairly cheap, to be honest. Because most of the time it's not even a double brick structure. It's just kind of almost like a portable house, really. Like a bit of a shed, really. Yeah, the thermals isn't that great. Yeah, so that's what I think you kind of find that the quality of the granny flats is not necessarily that great.
So the grade of the house.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. You feel hot in summer, cold in winter.
I get you. It's something we've seen a lot of. I think, particularly in this part of the market, in the property cycle, with the lending environment being tough to go and borrow more money, people aren't able to upgrade their home necessarily. And of course, there's lots of costs of stamp duty and all of these things. So lots of people are considering the idea of doing renovations on their house, doing things maybe like a granny flat, or potentially doing a knockdown rebuild. But I think a lot of people are very cautious because there's a lot of builders out there. And there's so many different businesses ranging from the one-man band all the way up to big organisations. So talk us through the process of what someone should go through in terms of the due diligence process when they're coming to approach a project like this.
So, typically speaking, when you're looking to approach builders, you should have a kind of a tender set document ready. That tender set might include things like, DA stamp drawings, your structural drawings, specifications, schedule of finishes, any acoustic reports if it's necessary under an airplane flight path, stormwater design. Those are just like some of the bare fundamentals you should have, kind of a bid package. When you approach the builders, you should do like a bit of research about themselves. I mean, sometimes there's a lot of easy telltales about the builders that you should be able to find that they're probably not suitable. Things like how is the builder, I guess, organized? How organized are they? Are they always late on meetings? Do they, the back of the ute is just going to complete mess kind of thing, right? Like those little things kind of give away, what kind of builder that person might be. And with these large franchise builders, some of them, it really comes down to a bit of luck of the draw because they have so many building managers, so many site managers, so many foremen. You really have to be careful about which one you get because it can be a bit of a lucky dip. Like some of these large companies, they've got fantastic builders, I'm sure, but some of them are a bit new and just graduated, just got their builder license. They might not necessarily have the experience. So you've got to kind of dig a bit deeper, see what the builder has done in the past, get some past client testimonials, go to some past projects. We sometimes have been told, certain builders might be award-winning builders, which is great, but sometimes after they win the award, their quality kind of slips because that foreman, that project manager might have gone to another company. So you've got to look at the most recent stuff. kind of one of the best way to gauge what kind of builder they are. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you manage your risk through that process? So I guess, is there certain things you should be looking for in the proposal, in the price, all of these types of things that can kind of be some telltale signs that you're on to the right person?
Yep, so typically when you go out to a bid process, you should have kind of a format of what you want the builders to come back in terms of the proposal. You don't want, approach 5 builders, they'll come back with you with just one lump sum figure. You want that kind of breakdown, and you want to structure it so that the breakdown has been set for all the 5 builders, so that when they come in, the quotes are set up the same way. That way you can start to compare apples to apples in the scope of work. So have a clear scope of work definition, have that kind of rough layout, so it might be insurance, preliminary, your electrical, plumbing, groundwork, concrete, PC items, allowance, like kind of that kind of structure. Once you have that structure in place and you receive the quotes back, obviously you want to have a look at the cost range. So typically speaking, a tender process will involve about 4 builders, and normally speaking, the most expensive and the cheapest builder, normally speaking, would get eliminated from that process, and the one in the 2 in the middle would then get approached for another tender interview. That's when you sit down with the builders and you start to really, interview them in terms of their understanding of the project. So you might ask them questions like, so you've had a look at the project, what do you think are the most critical stages or critical things about the project? Where do you see the project potentially going wrong or cost blowouts? Any experienced builder should be able to tell you certain things about, the most difficult part and difficult elements for the project. And that's how you really get to see, which builder has a better understanding, has actually looked through the details.
Sure.
If you just look at the ballpark figure alone, that's really sometimes can be very, not can be misleading at times if you're just looking at the figure. Yeah.
Look, I guess for commercial building that you're doing, right, I guess the developer that you're dealing with really understands everything. They understand what's going on.
Sure.
And they would get everything that you just said.
Yep.
But I think for your average punter at home, they'd be pretty confused. How much hand-holding do you have to do for a mum and dad or a married couple that are building a house or renovating or something like that, who understands the process? Not at all.
So for someone like that hasn't really built before, what we tend to recommend them to do is have someone do the tender review for them, an experienced professional. So that's normally speaking the architect that would do that kind of process of going out the tender and receiving the things and doing the tender review process. Depending on the project size, if it's a bigger project, the client might engage a project manager to oversee that kind of tender review process. You really want someone that's experienced that can, not just compare the quotes per se, but compare the scope of works. Because one guy might be cheaper, but usually, he's cheaper for a reason. He might have left out certain things, And if you don't look at those little fine details, those fine lines in the contract, that's usually when the cost blowouts or arguments kind of occur in the project. And the best way to do that is if you have a set scope of work, which you can just issue out to all the builders, then that mitigates that kind of risk, because all the builders are quoting for the same thing.
Who prepares that? Who prepares that scope of works? Because I wouldn't be able to prepare a scope of works, I tell you.
Yeah, usually that's done by the architect.
They're the architect.
Yeah.
Okay.
But usually when the builders come back with a quote, depending on the level of experience of the builder or the level of details in the proposal, they should have certain exclusions, assumptions, and scope of works included in their quote as well. So you might want to, usually it's a good thing to cross-check, because sometimes what might happen is you might have prepared a scope of work package, sent it out to the builder, but the builder might have looked at it and go, oh, this is really hard, I don't really want to put this in my quote because my price will go up.
Sure.
So they might have just
left some things out.
Exactly,
Yeah.
So,
well, it's sneaky and it's scary because you hear a lot of people getting burnt.
sure.
I think that when most people approach some type of a knockdown rebuild or renovation, it's an emotional process. It's their home. It's like they're a developer who's just in it for the money.
Definitely,
You're doing it because this is going to be the forever home potentially, how they're going to raise their family. So I think a lot of people approach it with this kind of emotional frame of decision making.
Sure.
And a lot of people are motivated about price. It's about how do I get the cheapest price or get this done, and people get burnt. So we've heard a lot of stories, and I know from first-hand experience with some clients that I've worked with that they've employed the services of a really good and comprehensive architect, or used a project manager that's helped facilitate the process. Now, I guess to give a kind of insight of what would be the kind of estimate of costs for someone like that to come in and do, say, project management or do that more holistic architectural service? Just as a ballpark.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the amount of difficulty, the scale of the project. What we sometimes recommend clients can do is if they just want to figure as a benchmark, it might be a good idea to approach some QS, like quantity surveyors.
Yeah, okay.
And if depending on the budget, obviously, and the scale of the project, sometimes it might be worthwhile getting 2 QS reports, because then you can cross-check. Because QS, a lot of QS sometimes aren't accurate. Some are good and they are accurate, but you kind of want a 2 QS report to then get an average, you know.
Sure.
So if they both come in within about 5% cost difference, then you know, okay, this is probably the realistic figure of what the project's going to cost. If you get 2 quotes, you know, and they're about 15% different, you know, okay, well, something's wrong here. Either one guy's allowed for way too much, or one guy's not calculated something correctly. And when you receive the quotes back, typically speaking, a builder margin for, I guess, your average, you know, 1 to 5 kind of mil kind of project, the builder margin, you're probably looking at something in between either 10 to, I guess, 20%, sometimes 25%, depending on the type and difficulty of the project. So if you get a quote back and it's going to be 15% cheaper, you really have to ask yourself, how is this builder making any money, right? Yeah.
Because you don't want the builders to go broke. How many, especially on those big development sites, we've seen it, and the builder goes under, and it can send everyone under. Everyone can go broke. Do you know what I mean? So it's the builder. You want the builder to make some cash. Exactly. You want them to be able to complete the project.
Sure.
You know?
And the problem with that is if a builder leaves halfway through the project, it's an insurance nightmare as well.
Oh yeah.
Because whoever's the next builder that finishes it, that's going to be their license on the line. Their insurance got to cover that job. So the costs, you know, it just blows way out of proportion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think on the website for, I think it was Fair Trading or one of the government websites, it actually recommends builders to put their margin up to 20% or above. But the problem with the industry at the moment is we're seeing a lot of builders that just try to undercut, you know, put that foot in the door, and then, you know, that's when the variations start coming in because certain things are not included, and that's
So that's a good point. Tell me about the state of the building industry in Sydney at the moment, because Sydney's gone through this monstrous property boom. We've seen over the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of construction in Sydney. There's been a lot of people, you know, knocking down their houses and building, you know, McMansions on them and things like that. Now that we've seen the property markets come off and we've seen that, you know, finance is harder to come by, has that affected the building trade?
So the thing is, I think for the industry as a whole, I don't think building will slow. It might slow a little bit, but plateau. I don't see it really dipping per se. And the reason for that is because, you know, Sydney, the population growth it's still skyrocketing as it is. Unless the government the next day decides, you know, we don't want to increase the population, that's a completely different beast. The way it's going at the moment, I mean, if you're a good builder and you're a good subby, a good subcontractor, good skills, good trade, the work pretty much doesn't stop because there's just so much out there at the moment. But lending definitely plays a huge role.
Lending plays a huge role, you know, mate. It's property and finance, they go hand in hand, and a lot of you know, majority of all this construction that's going on, it's all funded by the banks. Do you know what I mean? So it's I'm assuming the same as, you know, property investment markets and property construction markets. When lending dries up a little bit, I'm assuming a little bit of the work dries up as well.
I think from what we've heard from architects, you know, the next probably 1 to 2 years, you'll see that little bit of a dip. But at the moment, there's still enough left in the bank for the construction to kind of keep going. So in about a year's time, I think we'll start to feel maybe get a bit more quiet. Which I mean is good and bad, because I mean the argument is that, you know, once it gets quiet, then all the bad gets, you know, kind of flushed away, gets filtered out. Only the good, the cream of the crop will get business.
It's about the boys from the men, eh, Dad?
Pretty much, pretty much. So I mean, I guess that's kind of the thing that we're kind of looking towards, to be honest.
You know, we've heard a lot about the difference between doing, I guess, a pay-as-you-go contract or a fixed-price construction contract. And I think there's people in kind of two realms of thought.
Sure.
In your experience, is there a certain type of customer or certain type of construction project that you would advocate that a customer should be doing a fixed price, or should just kind of pay as you go?
Typically speaking, lump sum contract I think is the best, and I think the banks obviously love lump sum contracts.
Well, they won't fund it any other way,
There's
too much risk for them, too many variables. You know?
So I think lump sum contract we prefer lump sum contract as well, as what we primarily use. In terms of cost plus, there's advantages in that, in the sense that if there's a good trust between the client and the builder, and everything's out on the open, and the client has somewhat of an understanding of construction work, cost plus can work. and cost plus works really well for those really high spec projects. And the reason for that is because a lot of building materials, I guess the cost per se of these building items can't necessarily be finalized during that tender stage. So those things get put aside as an allowance, and agreed builder margin is then allowed on the contract, and then things get marked up for the builder. So that's usually best, I think, for cost plus projects. Those kind of scale projects where there's a lot of variables at play, and the client and the builder are on a good understanding. They understand each other. There's a understanding and trust built. That's usually when we recommend it. But for the most part, I would recommend clients to go with the lump sum.
At least it gives you some peace of mind. You know what you're in for. You don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. I got a memory flashback now. Years ago, I remember this Australian billionaire a long time ago when Australia was going through big inflation. Had a building company had some big job. I can't remember what it was. It was like a mall or something monstrous. It was a huge job. And he had a fixed price contract on this particular job. And it was a monstrous build. I think they were down in Melbourne. And they essentially had this rampant inflation, and the cost of the materials, because it was like a 7-year job or something, the cost of the materials went up, that it had completely eroded all of his margin and actually put it in negative. So every day that he was completing this job, he was just losing money hand over foot.
Ray Dalio spoke about that, didn't he? Because Ray Dalio, the hedge fund manager, basically tried to offer this guy an opportunity to create a currency hedging strategy to help him hedge against the risk of his commodities and construction materials. If there was some change in the economy, and he didn't do it, and that's not sent him broke.
It sent him broke, you know what I mean? So it's not just the mum and dads out there. It's even the billionaires that can be affected by this, and you need to get it right. You need to nail it.
Well, certain contracts I think do have that clause about the rise and fall of building materials. But for obvious reasons, most clients tend to not want to put that in the contract. I mean, for a job that's not too long, I guess it's not too bad. But something like a 7-year construction,
anything can happen in 7 years.
100%.
I think the lawyers probably should have put that clause in there.
So, mate, what are you kind of excited about in your business? What are you kind of striving towards moving forward as an entrepreneur, as a business owner?
Yeah, so we're very passionate about doing projects that are built with quality, which is what we're all about. We're passionate about our work. We want to be able to build something and say that's ours. It's going to stand through the test of time. For us, we're excited because our company's kind of starting to grow bit by bit. We're getting a bit of traction, getting some larger scale projects on board. So we've started to kind of walk away from the renovation kind of scale projects, and part of the reason for that was just it's not necessarily a scalable business. So we're trying to look at some of the aged care and moving to some of the commercial kind of projects now.
So Daz, if I ring you up one day, I say, Darren, I'm getting excited here. I want to buy a block of land and I want to build 8 units. Right? Where do I start?
So when you start that process, you have to look at you do a feasibility study. It's the first thing first, and lots of different people would be able to do feasibility studies
on the land.
On the land,
on the land.
Yeah, just to see what's possible, because you have to deal with council, the regulations, what's actually building height, maximum amount of floor area. So there's all these little things you got to consider. Look at what's possible, then you got to consider if I put this through, depending on the neighborhood, difficulty of the site access. That's another thing you have to consider. So your best approach is either speak to a builder or an architect first to get that kind of feasibility study done. From what I've been told, I think certain accountants might also do that kind of aspect, or quantity surveyors or project managers, they can also do feasibility studies. But I think it's better to get an architect or a builder to kind of be on board in that early stage, And then once you weigh up the figures and see what's the profit return investment, then you can make a sound decision of whether you should purchase that land,
So if you're looking at trying to find the site, where do you even begin? Where do you even begin if you don't even have a site yet? Where do you get this information from to see, that might be a site, that might not be a site?
Yeah, so I think the best thing is if you're just looking from step one, looking for a land or an area, probably want to speak to a real estate agent or buyer's agent to find you some properties. Once they find you those properties, then you can, it's quite easy to go onto the local government council website, type in that street address and look at the zoning of that land, and you can figure out what's the maximum building height for that block of land, what is the maximum floor ratio that you can potentially build, and what class building or what type of building I should say you can build on that land. Once you have those information on hand, then you can decide, okay, it's possible for, let's say we can build a unit, maybe 20 floors or 20 units. You can then look at the figures and then look at past data of how much they sell for. then decide, okay, this is potentially how much I can make, assuming that construction and building materials stay, and interest rates will come into play as well. So once you do that feasibility study, then you can make a sound decision whether you want to purchase that land. Yeah.
And as a builder, what's the kind of biggest risk for you guys working with like a developer, like a punter like Sam? He goes and buys a block of land, says he wants to build some units.
Yeah.
He calls you up, he's done his feasibility study.
On the back of a napkin, I've just written it. Daz, I think this is going to work, this one.
Yeah.
What's the biggest risk for you as the builder?
At the moment, I think hands down the biggest risk for us is developers not being able to get the loan.
Sure.
We've had a few developer clients, approach us saying we've got the land, we've got DA, we're good to go. We talk about the contract sum, and then once they approach the banks knock them back.
You got to send them to me, Daz. I'll get them the money.
Yeah, definitely. Well, now we know who to send them to. They were having problems with the banks, and sometimes the problem is these developers sometimes they can get a bit stubborn in not wanting to deal with brokers and want to talk directly to the bank.
Yeah.
Which, as you guys know, that's not always the best option.
No. It was in the past.
It's all about relationships.
It was all about you could go to your bank manager, shout him a couple of beers on a Friday afternoon. Daz, you're a good bloke. I reckon I'll give you the money.
He'll open the vault.
Yeah, here you go. Just take it. Pay back when you get the chance. Those days are long gone. They're dead and buried. But I guess a lot of developers are probably in their 50s or 60s, and they were used to sort of coming up in that environment. There's not a lot of developers that I know that are in their 20s per se. Yeah. So I guess that sort of change as the demographics of who the developers are changes over time as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a crackdown as well, obviously.
It has, yeah. Like a lot of the banks now, while we're on the topic, they won't, the major banks, they won't fund first-time developers anymore.
Exactly.
They want to see someone who's got 2 or 3 or 4 projects under their belt. So anyone who's starting to get into the industry has to look to these sort of third-tier lenders because they're the only ones willing to take a punt on them. Where that wasn't the case even 2 years ago.
What really excites me, mate, and what's always interested me in terms of these big development projects is how quickly they go up. So talk to me about the process that you've gone with the developers. Let's say it's 400 units, right?
Yeah.
What's the kind of process of going through the whole construction, I guess, and I guess the project management of getting these things to go up as quick as you possibly can?
I think the secret of it is good planning, and a lot of it is behind the scenes planning before you start to get the tools out and going on site and you don't want to get hands on. A lot of it is done behind the scenes, like before you got to sit down with all the consultants. Something like that big, 400 units, there's a lot of service consultants. So we're talking architect, different engineers for hydraulic, electrical, fire, maybe acoustic engineer as well. So there's a whole slew of different consultants that you have to bring on board, bring together, sit down, have that meeting and a group discussion. Once you've done that planning, then you've got to go out, get those subcontractors, have that big meeting with all the subcontractors to plan out the process as well. And get people to agree on, what are the deliverables, what are we trying to achieve, what's realistic. Sometimes the problem we see and the mistakes we see is, someone might create this fantastic Gantt chart of the construction program, but they haven't communicated with the subbies, right? Then the subbies might be already swamped with work for the next 2 months. And the next thing you know, the project gets delayed and, inevitably it's a roll-on effect. From what's 1 month becomes 6 month delay. So you're going to have that pre-planning meeting, which we're very passionate about doing those kind of behind the scenes, like preemptive working and planning before you go on site, start building.
That makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Those issues just compound, but one thing doesn't fall into place and it throws out everything else.
They're big jobs, man. Like as you said, there's so many moving parts. I'd never be any good at this. There's too much chaos for me. Jackson would probably be very good at it. I would be absolutely no good at it. How do you manage everything? Because even for you guys being the builder, there's you've got to manage not only all those professionals, but you've got to manage all the trades professionals as well.
Yeah, sure.
How do you? Because I know some of it just disintegrates into chaos. Not with you guys, but there's other builders out there where it ends up in the abyss, right? How do you guys run a clean show and keep everyone on board and focused and not falling into the abyss?
So that's very interesting. So for us, we're big advocates of leveraging technology because at the moment we're at the age of technology now, so there's no reason not to embrace this in the construction field. So we have this online construction management program called Builder Trend, and what that does is it's an online platform that we keep all the documents in place, so there's no confusion about what's the latest current drawing. We have all the consultants on that platform. We have all our subbies on that platform. The client gets to log in as well, so they know what's going on site daily and weekly and can see the progress of site. So we manage all our construction projects on that platform because that gives us the availability to look at not just the budgeting side of things, which is also stored there and links to Xero, but we can do our program, like construction program management on that platform. We can do our messagings between the different clients, like consultants and subbies. Everyone's on that one platform, everyone's held accountable, and everyone feels vested in the sense that they can see the project kind of come to life. Yeah, that's how we try to manage our projects. Yeah,
it's the way of the future, really, isn't
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
I guess one of the big things is around everything's been done. I think a lot of people these days, they feel like the construction isn't as good as what it once was.
Yeah.
I think everyone has this kind of preconceived idea that back in the day everything was always better.
Yeah.
Water tasted better, cars were better, construction was better.
Yeah.
So these days we've got a modern construction. What's your opinion in terms of how things are now in terms of the construction standards compared to what it was before?
Sure. So I think personally speaking, like not all the construction back in the past was all that great. We've seen some really old buildings that weren't built properly, like brickworks aren't biting towards one another. There's structural like underpinning missing or foundations missing. So not all old buildings are necessarily great. Some of them are good in the sense that those subbies have put a lot of time and work into it. The problem right now that we're facing in trades is this rush, right? Everyone's in a rush to finish what they want onto the next job site. And then the problem is, things aren't being done properly the first time through. So you've got to do it the second time. And that, I think in terms of skills and technology that we have the potential to do better things, definitely right now, especially with the technology of new building materials that's coming through. But the problem is everyone's in this constant rush, and no one wants to pay that little bit more just to get it done the right way, the first time through, especially with waterproofing. That's one of those things that we see come up time and time again. It's a big problem. So I think one of the recent studies, there's about 40% of waterproofing issues with units that were built between that 2010 period to 2015 of the units. And, so all it takes is just that little bit of time. And sometimes we tell these to clients, if it's a client that's going to move in, they kind of appreciate sometimes spending maybe just a little bit more, like 5% more, just to get it done the right 100%. Way through the first time. But sometimes as an investor, they might be just looking at the numbers and skimping on things, and that's when I guess you see those high rise of all these problems like waterproofing and even structural problems sometimes even.
It's bad, eh? It really is. It's
very disheartening. Yeah.
It's not a lack of skill; it's a lack of effort, I guess you'd have to call it.
Yeah.
It's the old thing, time is money, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I guess that's one of those double-edged swords of technology now. Everyone's expecting things to be done just
really
tomorrow,
quickly.
The next day. But with trades, everything is hands-on construction. You can't really rush things. Concrete's going to take however long it wants to dry. You can't just, do it the next day.
I've heard horror stories about, I'm a teen, so 97% of my friends are concreters. But
sure.
I've heard stories when I'm out with them, and they'll talk about concrete being poured in the morning and a brickie being on site laying bricks on the concrete in the afternoon. Now, I'm a calculated man, right? I don't know much about building a block of units, but I know that you probably shouldn't do that.
No, definitely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and it makes you think, it makes me worried about some of these buildings that are going up.
Yeah.
And obviously there's some that do, as you said, a phenomenal job, and the quality is actually better because the skills we have today are better and the materials we have today are better. So if we, use the effort to combine those two, the buildings should actually be better, but sometimes they're not,
Yeah, it's just one of those things, like when people try to rush those jobs, like that's usually when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess, if nothing happens, no accidents happen, it kind of gets, swept under the rug. No one knows any better. But when something goes wrong, it's talking about lives potentially in some of these job sites.
100%.
Yeah, it's just not worth it for us. Yeah.
Look, when I've got clients that are buying any new property or even established properties, I always advocate that they get a proper building inspection. They get somebody who's a professional, has a high attention to detail, that goes out and sees what the finishing, the quality is of the fixtures and finishings, and if there are any problems that are likely to rear their ugly head.
Sure.
I guess, is there any kind of tips that you'd have made in terms of just making sure that if you're doing construction, whether it's a small scale renovation, knockdown rebuild, or a full development, of what you can do to make sure that you can have that kind of quality assurance in place?
I guess there's different ways you can go about it. Like you can sometimes employ a third party to kind of do the quality control checking. But that's a lot of cost involved. I think sometimes it comes down to that initial talks when you're signing the contract, right? Sometimes what we see happens is, the client might go out to builders, get some quotes back, maybe have a builder that they want in mind, but then they try and really push down the price and really, bring them a little bit of hurt. And the builder, because, they want the job, they say, okay, I yield, I'll give you, however much price. Yeah. And then so that you're already starting off on the wrong foot from day one, and it's one of those things that's, why go through that when you know potentially if something goes wrong, the cost below, we're talking like $100,000.
They just roll the dice on it, don't they?
No, it's not. It's just getting that relationship built the right way
Exactly
first time
right.
through, and you have that level of trust and built in with the client and the builder on day one. Then the project will go around quite smoothly. Yeah.
Tell us the horror stories, mate. I want the worst one.
I want the
worst story you've ever heard in the building trade.
Well, there's a really I guess there's so many stories. I have to think about which one I want to talk about. Do you want a horror story about a building actually being built, or we want like a horror story of, I guess, what potentially could have happened, but thankfully it didn't happen?
Ooh, I want the one that happened.
That didn't happen.
I want the one that happened. Yeah.
So there was this one project that we got approached for. It was it's a sizable extension or renovation kind of scale project. We're talking about roughly around $1 million mark that we were tendering for. So we submitted a quote. We went through the process of the tender process, which normally takes about a month. We heard the architect told us we came about, I think we were right in the middle. I think we were the second highest at the time. And then the client wanted the cheapest one. And the cheapest one happened to be about nearly $200,000 cheaper than us.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah, there's a sizable amount. Yeah. So we just, at least the architect was very, transparent in the sense that they told us, these are the quotes we got back. Sure. Here's where you sat. We thought you should have been rather in a good spot to win the job, but the client just wanted to go the lowest, so it's out of our control. So we were very curious. So every time we lose one of those tenders, we tend to look at how they quoted for everything, because there's a kind of a formulaic approach about the set out. So we noticed straight away our preliminary sum was and the builder that came first, like the most expensive, he was about, I think, just about 50,000 more than us. So we were pretty close, but the lowest guy was just way lower than everyone else. So we looked at the preliminaries, and this guy had, quoted about 100,000 less in the preliminaries, right? And so that was already a red flag for us. Then we looked through and we realized, a lot of every other thing was just about 10% lower. Then we see the carpentry cost, and the carpentry cost was actually higher than us. So from that alone tells us that this guy is probably more of a carpentry builder. He's probably hands on tools, so he can save, maybe on some of the preliminary costs, but get the money back from the carpentry costs because they're a carpenter on hand. But, long story short, the project goes on. We drive by about, I think, 2-3 months later, because we were curious to see, how's this builder doing with this cheap? There's no profit. If you told us do it for 20,000 less, we'd be taking a loss, not even breaking even. We come on the site and we realize, there's been no proper signage. There's no proper fencing as well. The project, half of it's been demolished, but the project has been on hold. Like, you can tell the builders it's just up and left,
No.
And you just know that client's going to be hurting because its project's going to get delayed. The client's definitely renting a house somewhere. The next builder that comes in is going to hike up the price because
the risk premium.
It's a mess now.
Yeah,
it's a mess.
That goes a cost. Like that 200,000 potentially could have saved. It's going to be them spending way more getting a subpar quality finish. So yeah, you see those things as really disheartening. And I mean, there was another one we saw at Kangaroo Point, which was, we're talking multi-million-dollar build, and we rocked up on site. It was meant to be a 3.5 million contract, and the builder wasn't even on site. We just went up, and there's only subbies on site, and we asked them, we said, where's the builder or the foreman, like who's looking after it? The subby just goes, I don't know who's in charge. We don't know who's in charge. It's crazy. That's a multi-million-dollar build. What have you, everything, and my heart breaks for them because it's not being built properly at all. Sure. We could already see structural problems. A bit of concrete cancer already starting to show through. And we just
during the build.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's really disheartening. But sometimes there's nothing you can do about them because the clients. Yeah.
I think it's one of these things, right? Where people, because as you said, it's an emotional thing. I think when it's commercial sites, I think everyone involved is a lot more educated in this arena, right? But I think when you start putting the residential stuff in,
it's all about education. People just don't know.
They don't know, and It worries me, do you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people, I think they're genuinely spending more than they can actually afford,
100%.
and that's why they keep trying to take all the shortcuts, because maybe they can't afford that, $1 million build or that $750,000 build. Do you know what I mean? And they're over-capitalising, and I don't know, how do you find that's a lot of people that are trying to that don't have the experience and they try to take control of a project, like an owner builder or something like that?
Yeah.
Do you find, what are sort of the troubles that they can run into?
So I think a lot of problems sometimes happen is they'll have this grand idea in mind, like I just want to maybe extend the back out maybe like 5 meters just so I have a little bit more space. They might go to a designer sells them this dream of adding another floor on top, and next thing you know it's a whole addition of the top floor. And then when they go out for pricing, the prices come back and they go, I can't afford this is ridiculous because the scope has increased, right? One of the ways you can kind of walk away and kind of protect yourself and not fall into that pitfall is there are services out there, like HIA has a home show, and every year or maybe twice in a year they'll have the HIA home show. At those home shows you can speak to an expert, talk to a builder basically, and if you're someone that's looking to renovate or build a new home, if you have drawings already prepared, it's a good idea before you submit to DA approval to then take those drawings, go sit down, talk to one of those experts, ask them, this is what I'm looking at, roughly between a range, what do you think this is going to cost? So if a builder looks at it and tell you it's going to cost you 800 to 900 and you were thinking it's going to be 300, at least you can pull the plug.
I probably shouldn't do this.
Don't go on. But once you submit it to DA for approval, it's too late. You've spent all this money and it's all gone down the drain. That's a problem.
Mate, what about these kit homes? Like these businesses that sell these kind of basically flat pack houses. What are your thoughts on that, mate?
So, see, for us, even though I did my bachelor degree, we are pretty strong in believing that you should get a builder and architect as separate entities, not these DNC kind of, not like custom home builders. A lot of these so-called custom home builders are project home builders. A lot of the project home builders, the quality definitely has risen a lot to where they were 10 years ago. It's so much better now. We've seen some project homes, it's a lot better quality. But the reason that they're able to be so cheap is because a lot of the details are kind of thrown away and the quality just isn't there. And a lot of clients, they fall into that pitfall, thinking that I can build a 2-story house for, I don't know, 600,000, I think is what they're promising now. But a lot of things are left out. For that 600,000, it has to be a perfectly square, flat land. There's all these variables. There's got to be carpet to the base package. If you want to go up, it's going to cost you more. And all these things are not included. Sometimes the project home builder might not even look at getting you occupation certificate. So OC is just completely excluded from the contract. So the client can't move in until they get OC, and that's an extra cost they have to worry about. Get all the certificates, that's their problem. So for us, we see the value in a project home. If you're someone that's looking to invest, just want a shell that you can rent out and not worry about, I guess, potentially project homes are okay. If you're someone that's looking to live in there and want this thing to stand, at least a few years longer, like 10 years plus, probably I wouldn't recommend them going down that route because the quality is definitely not there. Sometimes corners have to be cut in order for them to keep it that low, right? So, I mean, if you think about a 2-story house, project homes are selling it for about 600, 700,000. Architecturally designed, spec'd out house or a 2-story house, we're talking could be around 1.5 million mark. That's nearly double, right?
Really? Is that how big the gap is?
Yeah, it can be that big a difference. And there's little things, right? Like an example I can tell you is if you go into a project house, a project home house, just look through any of the bedroom wardrobes, right? The door handles are really cheap. They're probably $20, $10 kind of little knobs and handles that fall apart quite easily. The moment you open that door, there's nothing in there. There's no joinery work. It's just one metal rod, right? That joinery work, to have a cupboard would be around $800 mark. So 3-bedroom, that's 800 times 3, about 2,400 that you've just saved. Just like that, just that little thing. And then your
wardrobe, there's nothing in there. It's just another room.
It's just a rod. It's just a metal clothes hanger rod. I'm dead serious. You can go to some of these kit homes, those showrooms, and have a look at them. A lot of the joinery is just all barren. It's just the bare bone minimum.
It's interesting, mate. Look, it all comes down to education. I think people don't, because they're so emotional, they want this thing done as quickly as possible. they want to make these new memories in this house.
Yeah.
They don't think about the process.
No. That's
And
right.
and I think that it's like there's an old saying: you buy once and you cry once, right?
Mm.
So you pay the price up front, and you're going to cry. It's going to
mind
hurt,
Yeah.
but it's better than paying cheap and then having to go buy again,
Yeah.
because it's going to hurt more in the long run.
Mm.
So that's some good insights, mate. Look, I think it's about trying to invest in the process and just invest in the education, right? Just
Yeah.
learn the ropes.
It's always, I mean, it's always a good idea to talk to someone that's been through that.
Sure.
I'm sure even as a, just mum and dad kind of looking to build a new home or something, I'm sure they have some family friends that's gone through that process. Talk through them, see what kind of problems, issues they face.
Sure.
You can learn from their experience, and then at the end of the day, if that's not the case, speak to an architect, right? Speak to a builder that's been there, done like several of these projects, and they can advise you, give you professional advice about how to go about it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So what's next for you, Daz? What's the grand dream, mate, that you're pursuing now?
So I guess for us, we've got a few kind of projects coming up, and larger scale projects that we're quite excited to take part in. So we're hoping we can get one of those, secure one of those, and start to move on to those. And we want to try and finish a project next year and try to go for an award, maybe for one of those construction building awards.
Nice.
So that's our goal for next year. And
Good stuff. So if we had to give a couple of, I guess, gold nuggets for our listeners or
Sure.
watchers, what would you share with them, mate, based on your experience?
So I think the best thing you can do is, if you're looking to build a new home, is speak to an architect first. Get them to give you a preliminary kind of drawing, sketch, and an idea. Once you've got that, you should then start approaching builders. If it's going to be a renovation addition kind of scale project, speak to an engineer first to see if it's even possible before you take that further. Once you get those figures in place, then you can start considering whether you want to submit to DA and go on further. And if you're looking to tender to builders, even someone that doesn't have much experience, it's worthwhile spending that little bit of money to get the architect to do the tender review process for you, have that interview with the builders to see who has a better understanding of the project, and invest in even just a few $1,000s on a QS report. I mean, something like a $5,000 QS report might save you a few $100,000s later down the track. So why not spend that little bit? What's that? $4 million about 0.05?
Yeah.
Like 0.5% off of $1 million.
It's not a lot of money compared
It's nothing compared to variations which blow out to like 15%. So those are the things I would definitely recommend.
Oh, mate, well, we appreciate you sharing your insights. It's going to be interesting to follow the journey and
Sure.
see some big buildings that Magico Construction.
Sorry, Daz, I'm going to buy some sites. We're going to do
Gonna
some
hook
sites.
you up.
We're going to buy some sites, don't worry, soon.
Sounds good.
Look at Jackson, he's so worried. He's so worried. He's so worried.
Alright everyone, well we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Enjoy the Journey podcast, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, guys.